Welcome to the deep dive. We take the sources you send us and we really try to pull out the key insights.
Exactly.
So today we're digging into a newsletter from No Agenda News, dated May 14th, 2025.
Right.
Our goal really is just to understand their take on things, what they're saying about, well, former President Trump's recent moves, U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East, that kind of thing.
And also how they fund their operation, which is a big part of their message.
Okay, yeah, good point. So the newsletter kicks off with Trump's Mother's Day weekend. It calls it a rampage of activity, including a speech over in Saudi Arabia. What did you find noteworthy there?
Well, the newsletter immediately points out the, let's say, opulent setting.
Ah.
Paid for by oil money, they say, which kind of sets a tone, you know. The main message of the speech, according to their analysis, was basically commerce, not conflict.
Commerce, not conflict.
Yeah, but with some, let's say, not-so-subtle warnings aimed at Iran kind of woven in there. It also mentioned Silicon Valley types were on the trip, too.
Interesting. So economic focus, maybe with a bit of an edge.
Seems like it. That's the angle they're presenting anyway.
And this focus on commerce, the newsletter also makes a big deal about Trump bypassing Israel on this trip. Why do they see that as so important?
Well, traditionally, the U.S.-Israel relationship is central to Middle East policy. So skipping Israel on a major trip to the Arab world, that's definitely a choice.
Yeah, it sends a message.
Right. And the no-agenda analysts, they read it as a sign of a growing rift, basically, between Trump and Netanyahu.
A rift. Over what, specifically?
They allege the core issue is that Israel wants to bomb Iran, but Trump is against it. So a pretty fundamental disagreement on strategy, if that's accurate.
Okay, that's a serious claim. And that leads into this Signalgate thing the newsletter mentioned. Sounds like something out of a spy novel.
It does, a bit. Basically, the newsletter lays out this alleged scheme. It involves the ousted National Security Advisor Mike Waltz and Netanyahu, the supposed goal, to push the U.S. towards war with Iran. And they apparently saw the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, as an obstacle. They describe him as a peacenik, essentially.
Peacenik, so he was in the way of the plan.
That's the narrative presented. Signalgate itself was supposedly this attempt to catch Hegseth telling tales on the system, leaking or something, to get him removed.
So they could replace him with someone more hawkish?
Exactly. Someone more inclined towards military action against Iran.
But the newsletter says it didn't quite work out like that.
Not at all, according to this account. It seems to have completely backfired.
How so?
Well, instead of Hegseth being ousted, it was Waltz and his aide who lost their jobs.
Oh.
And Netanyahu, he ended up, quote, in the doghouse.
Wow. So quite the turn of events.
Definitely. And right after this, the newsletter highlights Trump engaging directly with the Houthis, bypassing Israel completely.
Direct talks with the Houthis. What about
to get an American hostage released and also to get them to stop bombing shipping lanes. But interestingly, the deal apparently allowed them to keep firing missiles into Israel.
That is unconventional diplomacy, to say the least. Very direct.
It certainly is. And this leads into the idea they float about Trump 2.0.
Right. What's the significance of that label here?
They seem to be suggesting a different approach this time around. One that doesn't tolerate, as they put it, John Bolton-like schemers.
So less appetite for advisors pushing intervention.
That seems to be the implication. They even mentioned Tulsi Gabbard potentially playing a role in keeping things honest within the administration, a move away from constant conflict footing, perhaps.
Interesting dynamic to watch. But this apparent shift, this potential de-escalation with Iran, it's not getting universal applause, even among Trump supporters.
No, definitely not. And the newsletter makes a point of this. They mention figures like Douglas Murray, Mark Levin, prominent conservative voices, reportedly starting to criticize Trump over this.
Because he's not going after Iran.
Exactly, because he seems to be backing away from confrontation.
Yeah.
But then you still have others demanding military action, so it's creating divisions.
Yeah, you can see how that would happen.
And No Agenda says they plan to sort of document these shifting sands within those circles. It's a reminder, isn't it? Even within groups that seem aligned, like, here in our own area, Deer Park or LaPorte, people can have really different takes on big international questions.
That's true. Complex issues rarely have simple answers everyone agrees on. Okay, let's shift gears a bit to how No Agenda itself operates. The newsletter really hammers home the listener support aspect, this V4V model. Why is that so central for them?
Well, they frame it as the absolute bedrock of their independence. They contrast themselves sharply with what they call bloated M5M operations, mainstream media.
M5M. Okay.
Their argument is that those outlets are fundamentally compromised, by corporate ownership, by advertisers, by this sort of corporate fear.
And listener funding avoids that.
That's the claim. They say relying solely on listeners through this value-for-value model lets them do their analysis without any outside pressure. They even point to what they see as underreporting of Joe Biden's health issues by places like Comcast, NBC News, as an example of that corporate influence.
So for them, V4V equals independence, and they'd argue more truthful reporting.
Basically, yes. And it taps into that idea that sometimes, local independent voices, whether it's a national show like this or something focused right here on Pasadena TX, might offer a perspective you don't get from the big players. Direct support helps keep those voices going.
Makes sense. And they certainly offer a lot of ways for listeners to provide that support, don't they? The newsletter lists quite a few.
Oh, yeah, it's comprehensive. You've got your standard one-time donations, PayPal, Stripe. Then there are these EP, executive producer donations, which give you kind of forever title.
Like a recognition thing.
Exactly. They also still take checks, old school, sent to a P.O. box. They even mention accepting checks in foreign currencies.
Suggest a global reach.
Potentially, yeah. And then there are the recurring donations, the subscriptions, which seem really important for them.
What are the options there?
Well, they say the most popular is $33.33 a month. There used to be an $11.11 one that was big. Lots of lucky number options.
Okay.
And they highlight a newer one, $4 a week or 75 cents per hour, which they say is getting popular. Seems like an effort to make it accessible.
75 cents an hour. Interesting way to frame it.
Isn't it? There's even a $50 per month knighthood layaway plan over 20 months. And of course, just open do-it-yourself amounts.
Yeah.
The bottom line they keep stressing is listener support is everything. No corporations, no advertisers, no influencers.
Very direct appeal. Finally, they mention regular features like memes of the week and hypocrite of the week. What's the likely purpose of those?
I think those probably add a bit of flavor and engagement, social commentary, maybe some humor with the memes. The hypocrite section likely calls out perceived inconsistencies from public figures or media.
Right, reinforcing their overall critical perspective.
Yeah, it helps shape the newsletter's distinct tone and viewpoint.
Okay, so let's try to summarize this deep dive into the May 14th No Agenda News newsletter. We're seeing their analysis paint a picture of Trump maybe shifting towards diplomacy or at least less direct conflict regarding Iran.
Right, which they suggest is causing friction with Israel and leading to some pretty intense internal political games back in the U.S., like that whole Signalgate story.
And alongside all that political analysis, there's this really strong, constant emphasis on their funding model, value for value, as the key to their independence from mainstream media influences.
Exactly. It's a specific lens on world events, coupled with a very clear statement about how they operate and why they believe that matters.
It certainly gives you, the listener, plenty to chew on. It makes you think about the role of independent media versus established outlets. How do we decide who to trust? And how do these big global events and political shifts actually connect back, or maybe fail to connect, with what's happening right here in our own communities? Something to consider.